Welcome back to the Climate Conundrum Podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Sanika Diwanji, and this is a show where we unpack the most pressing climate issues of our time through candid conversations with experts. Today's episode is incredibly urgent and important. Uh, COP29 just got over in Baku, Azerbaijan, and I wanted to do a sort of deload, debrief episode on what happened this year, what were the discussions, and where do we stand today. So we have a special guest here. Joining us today is Abinash Mohanty. He's a scientist in the field of climate change and sustainability. And Abinash is also the global sector head of climate change and sustainability at IPE Global. One of the key areas of his expertise is that he has been an expert reviewer at IPCC's AR6 cycle. He'll tell you more about what that means. These are all jargons that we like to explore and unpack in the show. So stay tuned. So welcome to the show, Avinash. I'm very happy that you are making time because you just landed from Baku today morning back home in Delhi, right? So thanks for making space in your calendar and doing this discussion.
Absolutely, Sunny, and congratulations. At least you're trying to decode these jargons. It has taken 30 editions of COP not to de-jargonize the terminologies, and as a result, the trust between the parties is kind of burning where it had to be bridged. So, congratulations on that part, and had to be can't ignore your invitation to be part of such an interesting conversation that you have been hosting. So, yeah, in terms of what I do, I actually try to decode, as you try to decode the climate jargons, I try to decode the impact of climate change from one to the other in terms of if there is a temperature rise, how is it going to impact Sarika? How is it going to impact Abinash? How is it going to impact our family members? How is it going to
Mhm.
impact our sabziwala, our maid? So that's where the attributional science comes into picture. And similarly, doing a lot of hypergranular assessments when everybody talks about a 2050, 2100 scenario, what I try to do and my team tries to do is a lot is about decoding these impacts in a 5-year, 10-year time scale at the most hyperlocal level available. Because doing a national assessment at India level, and India is such a big country, is different to that of sub-states, sub-national kind of thing, and then further below at districts, even further below at blocks, villages, cities, and as a result, how you can nudge the action. So that's what I do in and out in terms of if there is a temperature rise globally, then how is it going to impact India? If it is a India related story, then how is it going to impact in some cities where we are staying, in some villages where a farmer is about to plow his field, in some of the manufacturing hubs where our GDP is about to be boosted. So, what exactly is the correlation, how it impacts? That's how day in, day out we try to do it. Use a lot of sophisticated AI, machine learning codes and models to demystify climate and make some actionable actions which can nudge the most marginalized communities and foster actions.
This is so crucial, and I would really like to again emphasize on what you said, right? How do these negotiations and big terminologies and scientific reports relate to us everyday lives of people who probably are just trying to do their daily tasks and get impacted by the changing climate? So, yeah, really important work, and I'm ready to dive into what happened at COP this year. What were the discussions that went on? So we are recording this on Sunday. Today's 24th November, and COP just ended yesterday night. So basically, I woke up today to a array of news pieces that were extremely polarizing. And yeah, I really want to start today's conversation with that topic in mind, that some headlines praise the Azerbaijan presidency for managing to gavel the deal that was pending for a couple of years now on climate finance negotiations. But then there was also the other extreme where people are really not happy. And there's a strong disappointment that has been shown, especially led by India, who showed how basically the figure of 300 billion US dollars that will be annually rolled out for developing nations versus the 1.3 trillion dollars that was expected by 2030. So yeah, let's start with that. What is your take on this outcome? Where India's absolute objections justified?
Well, it has taken 30 editions of COP and 29th edition of COP across the beautiful, stunning Caspian Sea banks. It managed to kind of navigate the pendulum, uh, arrange array of pressing topics around the climate negotiations to be at least stable. But in terms of outcomes, it's not a good COP to
Hmm.
label it as, right? It was a very bad COP for the planet, especially for the vulnerable and most hit vulnerable countries, and that's why because Azerbaijan presidency or Baku presidency kind of gavelled a lot of in a rushed manner. There was lack of accountability where the countries had to kind of figure out how much of financing, and it's no kind of a there's no backdoor kind of discussions that had to happen, right? The developed countries have been kind of taken up the larger carbon sink, and they need to enact, and they need to enact faster, support the most vulnerable and marginalized countries. In a return, what has happened out of COP, although it was managed to gavel, I mean, the negotiations tussled between $250 billion when countries like India, the developing countries, staged a walkout. It was a sheer solidarity in a way by the developing countries to voice what exactly the voice need to be heard and how it had to be heard. Rather than that, but it could manage to gavel from 250 to 300, and that $300 billion again. The devil lies in the detail. If you have to break it down, then you'll have to see that it's not the whole lot of money that's been put on the table. It's also the developing countries have to mobilize their own funds. The private sector has to come in, so on and so forth. And then there are loans and grants, which loans and grants are going to come in at what part, how are you going to use it? These are some of the details which, if you start putting it together and plugging it together, it's more of a emblematic or a token kind of gaveling of the outcome. So yeah, in a way, if it was about accountability of the developed countries before the Baku COP, there was a lot of conversation that was going on, and it was more about how much is accountability going to be fostered, and that accountability for sure is not been fostered. Number one. Number two, what this also meant is the financing is more about the new collective quantified goal. At first, there was very abstract about this NCQG because the new collective quantified goal kind of was more drafted, and it was more qualitative. You can't have a quantified goal in a qualitative term. So that's what during the first phase of negotiation, there was a lot of tussle and tug of war that happened. And then finally, the quantifiable amount is 300 billion. That's one. Second is operationalization of the Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, which is more about the carbon markets. Now, UN has kind of established is going to establish a carbon market facility, and countries can interchangeably use it. The accountability between the countries, if India and Bhutan are trying to trade some of the carbons, then it would be the host country who's going to do it. It's not going to be double reported. So those are some of the nuts and bolts. I think that was more importantly a success story from the Baku, um, where at least now what would happen is a lot of private sector mobilization, which was supposed to happen, was not happening. And there was
Hmm.
no incentives, there was no accountability with the private sectors, because private sectors are not bounded by boundaries until and unless you have bilateral geopolitical tensions between two countries. So that's where the Article 6 operationalization, especially Article 6.4 operationalization, was one of the biggest takeaways, and that's really important for countries. We'll decode maybe in the later half of our conversation how is it important for a country, especially for a country in India, which is more largely dependent on which is agrarian economy driven. And how is it going to support that? We'll try to decode it. But at the onset, these were the two kind of puzzle pieces. Article 6, there was good kind of um, marching up, leapfrogging around that in terms of operationalizing. Again, in the devil lies in the detail in terms of who is going to do it, how faster it's going to act, how faster and how sooner this market tradings can happen. This accounting of the carbon credits are going to happen. These are only something which time can answer.
Yeah, no, I will come to that point actually. But before that, I think you mentioned the NCQG, right? These are all kind of heavy terminologies. And in our last episode with Arjun Dutt from CEW, actually, we tried to decode what some of these terms mean. Were there any surprises that came along the way this year? Because I know that it was already discussed and enough was talked about this year's COP being the finance COP, so to say. So, right on day two, I think they gave out this positive idea that, okay, well, we are going towards a global carbon market framework, and most countries had already accepted it at the outset. But towards the end, then there were these negotiations that fell short on the climate financing part. So how does this impact the broader? What are the broader implications of this deal, actually?
Well, it has taken 30 editions of Conference of Parties. Paris Agreement was a landmark one where countries came together to kind of halt the carbon emissions and at the same time the temperature rise, which was leading to the larger global warming. But unfortunately, what happened is COP processes are becoming more and more distrustworthy than
Mhm.
becoming trustworthy. The bridge between the developed and developing nations, more importantly, some of the Pacific, small island developing states like countries, where more than 50% of countries have already been washed out. The countries have been need to be evacuated. So there is an existential crisis, and this existential crisis is going to be more and more rampant, and that's what has been the challenge. The developed countries have uh, eaten up the largest carbon sink. The developing countries, while they have to balance between carbon sink as well as their economic transition, there is a huge impact that's come along. And the analysis that we have done recently, we launched because we are establishing climate risk observatories across states and districts and cities. And the first thing that IPE Global, along with its partner ESRI, has done is established a global, at least at a country level, a template of a climate risk observatory. We could find that 85% of Indian districts are extreme event, sorry, 80% of Indian districts are extreme event hotspots. That means flood, cyclone, drought, some way or the other hitting this 80%. But more importantly, 45% of these districts are kind of experiencing a swapping trend. The swapping trend is traditional flood prone areas are becoming drought prone areas are becoming flood prone, so on and so forth. And these numbers are grave numbers. So, as a district magistrate, if you are kind of planning to manage flood this year, you will end up managing drought and you'll be clueless and you're below the real operational kind of emergency response, disaster risk reduction respondents, all of them would be clueless how to do it. So that's where the balance, if you are investing, say, $100, you're ending up kind of losing because of loss and damage through the climate extreme impact, somewhere around 40 to 50% of it. So you are net in a 50 kind of developmental economic trajectory. So this is why this COP was very important. That at least that recognition has to be done, but with recognition, you need real action. And that recognition to real action journey could only be filled in with financing. So, yeah, that's why this new collective quantified goal was more about how much money do you need. It's like how much budget do you need to run your family,
Mhm.
vis-a-vis to run your state, vis-a-vis to run your country. So, under what heads? And that is what the new collective quantified goal is all about. But we are falling short of the budget.
But then COP is often described as a legal battleground where agreements are won or lost depending on how the negotiations go in terms of particular words. And it's literally just people huddled together trying to talk about the little words and the few legal terminologies that are put in. So, for listeners who feel removed from this process of the whole COP negotiations, how are the COP decisions basically made? Can you just give a quick summary and overview of that?
Yeah. So you have an agenda every year before the COP starts and the presidency puts it out. This year, Baku had put out. Last year, Dubai had put out. Last year, it was Sharm el Sheikh. So each presidency puts out an agenda, and that agenda is agreed by the parties, and based on which there are different tracks of negotiations that happen. And then there is a draft text that comes out, and that draft text, once it comes out, it is up for discussion at a larger plenary. That's what it takes almost 2 weeks of time. Just before 2 weeks, end of the second week, this happens, and then finally, across the panel plenary sessions, the presidency puts out the gavel on the agreed, on the non-agreed, and then there are quorums where within the quorums you have certain percentage of parties agreeing to it, not agreeing to it, walking out. Yesterday there was a situation when there was a walkout. Countries would
Mm,
not have. I mean that quorum kind of numbers would not have reached. And that's how it becomes very interesting in terms of how the processes have been set. It's a very interesting process to understand, but at the same time, it's also an interesting platform where countries can put their perspective on behalf of their communities, their citizens, more largely from a climate impact side of the story, what is right, what is wrong, so that moral compassing also happens, and moral policing also happens. And you ignore, you acknowledge, or you pass the buck. By the end of the day, these conversations make, I think, people who are most accountable at least to give a clarification towards it. And that's why these COP processes are very important, because it's at a global arena when collective countries, 200 more kind of countries who are part to the Paris Agreement, more countries come down, put down their views, why it is important, why it is not important. Some countries trying to flex their muscles on the
mm,
draft text, on the wordings, what you rightly said, right? So this is very interesting. And then there are some a pool of countries who try to voice it out. So it has always been a balance of power play. If you want to understand COP negotiations from an environmental climate justice purview, this is an international relations platform. This is
mm,
more of a diplomatic conversation and negotiation that happens rather than having this conversation at a war field. So
absolutely.
that's how it is important in a way.
This does sound fascinating. So last year at last year at COP27 in Egypt, we saw the initiation of the Loss and Damage Fund, and that got operationalized at the last year's COP in Dubai. But at COP29 now, the focus this year, as you rightly mentioned earlier, shifted to the NCQG, the new Collective Quantified Goal for Climate Finance. So when from where I stand as an observer, as someone who's invested in the process, as a communicator, sometimes I can't help but feel like the goalpost is constantly shifting. Just as we're about to secure one agreement and a consensus on that, the focus moves to something else. What is your perspective on this? And basically not just the perspective, but as someone who has to implement those strategies that are discussed at the granular level from your projects in India, for example, how does it affect work, real work? When COP is done, you come back home. What changes?
It's a heavy loaded question.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
to be very honest, Now, how it hampers in large way. Let's try to decode loss and damage facility. Loss and damage facility was kind of agreed in Egypt, got operationalized in Dubai, and World Bank apparently is from its Philippines office is going to make this fund operationalize. But the accountability of how much funds are going to be placed out, how countries are going to be part of the process, who is going to what, how much quantum of money. These
Mm.
numbers are very, very important. And that monitoring and evaluation reporting doesn't happen year on year, right? And that is why, as a result, what you rightly said, if you're an observer, you'll see that, oh, this is the new buzzword. This is the new jargon which is at the play. And it feels like there is a constant shift of the goalposts. Because
Mm.
all of these terminologies that we discuss, similarly on Article 6, for next 8 years, there is no discussion going to happen in terms of what numbers are we going to choose. So that will freeze. So until next 8 years, it is more about the operational reporting. But those reporting happens through the biannual reporting processes, what we call it as NatCom, National Communication Processes. But decoding them or de-jargonizing them again becomes a very important respect to it, because you can't just decode them right away. And those are available in the public domain, but you need to have some sort of climate literacy training to decode them. And that's where I think the nexus between negotiations to climate communication to climate science, the bridge is actually feasible.
Mhm.
Because what happens is, climate scientists like us, we find it very fancy in terms of doing some great analysis. We put in our heart and soul to bring out that reality in terms using science-based methods, approaches. And what happens next is that goes into a publication, scientific
Mhm.
publication into a high impact factor, but it's never communicated if the what does the new collective quantified goal means for a farmer based out of Bihar or
Of
based out of
course.
Punjab, right? Or the work that we are doing, we're developing the multi-hazard risk atlas for the city of Mumbai and scaling that work through Global South-South cooperation into the Urban Risk Observatory for Ghana cities. So there are a lot of similarities between what we are seeing in Mumbai, for example, and across 5 cities in Ghana. There are a lot of similarities. But what is happening is, how do we implement them? Now, for implementing in India, I'll tell you the stark difference. For implementing this in India, government of Maharashtra, the government of India, all of them have joined together, and it's an internal public financing, which has been managed by UNDP, who is trying to kind of be that uh, uh, process keeper, the peer reviewer. So UNDP is managing this whole process.
Mhm.
But if you go to Ghana, how the power play sits is, the government out there, the Ghana Meteorological Department, Environmental Protection Agency, and others only can provide advice to us, whereas the work has been supported by FCDO and European Union. That's been managed by PwC. And interestingly, the Ghana government wants this to be done at pan kind of Ghana. And at African Union level, this should be scaled up. But the kitty of money which is available is only smaller. So you create that kind of template, scale it up across, right? This becomes a longer process. And by the time you get involved into the longer processes, what happens is you literally can't insulate the larger communities. You can only
Absolutely.
provide indicative numbers. So those are the challenges. If you don't have money coming in where it is required most, you'll be doing activities in a piecemeal.
But on that note, I think you have discussed a lot about decentralizing climate solutions, and the focus of what you just said also sort of veered towards that. Um, Climate finance is not available the way we all wanted it, and what developing countries were hoping to get delivered this year, right? Now we have to accept and move on for the next 8 years, try and figure that out. There is no one size solution to also the ideas being put out there in terms of how to use this finance, where to use it, and where to bring it out from. Carbon markets is being discussed about this. Um, but I'd love to know more on. Also, you had the same side event title on this idea of decentralizing climate solutions. So I'd love to know more about this part. You just mentioned a couple of things right now, but that would be interesting to delve into.
Absolutely. In terms of decentralizing, there are innovations, and how at IP we have been trying to do a lot of work is identifying the real problem, but also the cascading. So, suppose if you have got fever, in common layman's language, let me just put it out. If you have got fever and you are kind of consuming paracetamols, then in a long-term scenario, how these paracetamols are going to impact you. Similarly, what we try to do is we do this hypergranular risk assessment, understand under different scenario, because the global 1.1 degree is not what impacting us, or uh, kind of halting 1.5 degree is not that. Today's problem is actually, at least in India, what numbers I had put out is a resultant of zero point 0.6, 0.7 degree rise in temperature.
Mm.
If zero point 0.6 and 0.7 degree rise in temperature across our Indian districts is this is the scenario, then these numbers become very important to understand at a local level what is going to be um, at stake. And as a result, what we are trying to do is we are trying to club our issues. The other project that we are doing is mapping the climate readiness. It is purely from a climate mitigation side, where we're trying to
Right.
look at the top 10 emitting states. If India has to achieve its net zero, whether these states at a subnational level are ready or not. And we're trying
Mm.
to club them together into system, technology, and finance. District out of 738 odd districts, if you have to bucket it, all the districts do not have a financial problem or a
Mhm.
technology problem or a systemic problem. What is at large is different. So, you identify, once you identify the problem, you try to bucket it whether there is a policy tweak or change that's required. Can the results be achieved within the given performer of policy schemes and actions? B, is there is a technological gap that's at stake, because technologies do not answer everything. And as a result, what happens is many a times we rush into terms of adopting to technology. Just for an example, in Delhi's case, we have got a lot of air purifier surge in terms of people buying them. But in the long run, if you are exposed more and more to ACs and air purifiers, that's going to bring down your immunity levels substantially. Outside there is 500 AQI or 400 AQI, and inside your room it's 30. Similarly, outside it's 45 degrees, 50 degrees, and inside your room it's around 15 degree, 20 degree. So those temperatures, those thermal comfort imbalances,
Mm.
those kind of stimuli imbalances that happens needs to be hyperlocal. And as a result, what our solutions are required need to be more often Indian centric, more often. I need to, I don't hate to say this, but we need to have solutions which is Marathi specific, Odia
Yeah.
specific, Bengali specific, North India specific, South India specific. And given that, these solutions then can be more hyper localized, because we are solving an utmost global problem which has a sheer hyper local implication
Mm.
through only hyperlocal kind of integrations. B, it also has a very repelling effect, positive ripple effect. The effect is that communities will be understanding these solutions better, because
Mm.
you are keeping the local context and the frivolous innovations at core of it. Second, just to give you an example, we are using many sophistication in terms of climate predictions, right? But there are communities who, by the position of ants, can say whether there would be rainfall or not. And that's what
Mm.
the traditional knowledge and wisdom comes into play. And we often ignore it because this global bottom up approach tends to kind of miss the bridge with the local context.
Uh, what I'm hearing from you is nature-based solutions, or indigenous knowledge probably comes at the topmost priority, because that is more um, driven towards hypergranular understanding of the environment. And second thing, what I'm hearing from you is collaboration in terms of governments as well as subnational and locally led solutions across borders, right? That might be our best chance to also operationalize these discussions that happen at a global event like COP to how we have to put out the solutions after COP is done, and then we meet next year again to figure out what went right and what went wrong in the year-long climate action narratives as well. I think moving on, I also want to understand, what do you think are the biggest challenges that India is currently facing in terms of climate financing? And what can be done to sort of fast track India's climate adaptation and goals currently?
Uh, just not India. Let's start it with, because the climate fraternity kind of is divided between three parts. One is climate adaptation, the other one is mitigation, the third one is around the nature, right? What we have termed it into nature-based solutions. But
Mm.
if you have to keep it simple, then this is the right time when you have to have adaptation bucket, mitigation bucket, and adaptation mitigation co-benefits bucket. Now, how the play between all three of this actually pan out? You just spoke about the nature-based solutions. Now, if you are trying to increase your tree cover, or the farmer community, 65% of our population is indulged in farming. So, if you have to make your climate resilient, agriculture the smarter, better, and the most prudent one, then what has to be done is how much of carbon sequestration can they do, right?
Mhm.
At what time? And this links back to Article 6, which is mitigation. So you have to start putting in together in terms of adaptation mitigation, and that's what has been one of the biggest challenges, because adaptation purely has been a public financing part. Mitigation has been a public as well as private more, because that's where the, and philanthropic also, because that's where the theory of change can be mapped out. And then when it comes to nature kind of restoration, is it, it's whether at the helms of public or the government agencies or with the community, some sort of
Mhm.
activities going on. That has been the larger kind of conundrum. Since we are a climate conundrum podcast, I'll say this is the larger conundrum that we have been facing, countries like India have been facing, in terms of where to what head that budget is going to come in, and start tagging them together in terms of understanding what exactly, if any spending which is done, how much climate relevant is it, how much climate sensitive is it. Then
Mhm.
you can actually bucket your $100, which is the largest spending, or 100 rupees, which has been spent out. My whole 100 rupees is actually at stake under different climate scenarios. And that's exactly what we are trying to do in Mumbai, scaling it to Ghana, is under different climate scenarios, how many floods are going to increase, how
Mhm.
many droughts are going to increase, how many kind of cyclones are going to increase. What happens if all of them together come in at different part of a year? Then how much of loss and damage is going to happen? Those kind of attribution correlation in terms of solution needs to be put in. Then you can actually map and go back to the finances. What will happen by that is you are not duplicating the effort. Many times in India, you would see one government agency will come down, make a road, the other agency will come down, break that, again, try to fix it. So you are duplicating the efforts as well as you're duplicating your resources.
Mm.
Now, for climate actions to be first right and financing to be kind of flowing in, what you have to do is you'll have to club them and understand if any activity has been done, then how much climate relevant is it? How much climate sensitive is it? It's okay to even do some activities which are not climate sensitive or relevant. It is okay. But at least tag them, plug them. Then what will happen is whatever is the delta missing link, that can be plugged in through international financing, through private sector financing. Now with operationalization of the Article 6 is going to be very important, of mobilizing private sectors
Mm.
to bring in, because you have a credible system to kind of link it. And that's where the philanthropic money also can come in terms of creating those kind of innovations to be piloted or made more bankable.
Mhm.
And as a result, what will happen is you will find a lot of homegrown free will innovations scaling from one region to the other to the other, and then you have a common global collective climate solution good rather than a country specific, city specific, community specific solution. And that's how the challenge that India and countries like India are grappling can be solved.
Well, thank you so much, Avinash, for this insightful discussion. You really helped boil down some of the complex issues into some basic, at least helping us connect dots as to where the climate negotiations come down when it comes to real world action, and how in India we can implement it, how you are trying through IPE and through your previous work to kind of roll out solutions as well as some ideas in not just India, but also different projects across developing countries. So thank you for shedding light on these issues. And I hope that beyond the COP negotiations, the work that goes on continues in a hopeful manner. So this is the goal for all of us.
Absolutely. And Sanika, keep decoding, de-jargonizing climate. We need a lot more these conversations to happen. And more importantly, to making our young generation more and more who are very, very podcast friendly than hard copy newspaper friendly
Mhm.
to decode carbon because it's already upon us. And some of these conversation at least can tickle our intellectual bones and especially around young folks. And if it tickles their intellectual bone, then I'm very sure they will have a solution. And collectively, that solution is answer to our hope that we are seeing. And probably that hope will insulate many generations to come in terms of how democratized solutions can be, how democratized climate information can be, how democratized the larger climate development can be. So if you want to democratize it, then you have to de-organize them, decode them, and more importantly, facilitate this conversation. So keep up doing the great work that you are doing in terms of decoding the jargons and making us accountable that we also have a role to play in terms of not publishing fancy papers, impactful papers, but also making it more palatable for the common of the commonest. So
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much. Yes. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Climate Conundrum Podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to subscribe and share. We really enjoy when you guys give us feedback and connect more viewers to our efforts. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and let's try and break down complex climate conundrums together bit by bit.